Still have Lawson Naidoo from Casac back with us. Lawson, we have you back with us. So let's just pick up where we left off earlier, just talking about just what's meant to happen now, because we're not sure if we're going to get any kind of decision. Will they be allowed to excuse themselves? And we know Advocate Paul Pretoria is saying he wants Zuma to continue answering questions while whatever process this is gets underway, or however it's going to be handled. What do you think is going to happen here when we come back?
Well, we're going to have to wait for the decision of Justice Zondo on this matter as to whether he's going to allow Mr. Zuma to excuse himself, as Mr. Sikakani put it, or whether he's going to insist that the summons remains valid now that the recusal application has been dismissed, and that Mr. Zuma needs to take the stand and continue to answer questions that was abruptly halted in July last year when he last appeared before the Commission. So that's a matter that's now in the hands of the Deputy Chief Justice, and he's going to have to make a ruling on that as soon as he returns.
And Lawson, when we lost you earlier, you were busy explaining to us what might happen, because we know that this inquiry is set down to go on until March. That's its mandate. But we also know that that oral testimony is scheduled to come to an end sometime in December. So what do we do if Jacob Zuma and his team continue to exhaust this entire process and continue to delay? What happens then?
Well, ultimately, it may well be that we end up, the Commission ends its work without having heard the version from Mr. Zuma, despite the fact that he's a central figure in this whole state capture inquiry, which goes back to the Public Protector's report in 2016. So he's known for many years that he has questions to answer. The former Public Protector, Thuli Madonsela, attempted to get responses from Mr. Zuma to various questions, and he refused to answer the questions that she put to him. So this is part of a long-term strategy by Mr. Zuma to avoid having to answer these questions, and it seems that he's going to use whatever mechanisms at his disposal, including, as Mr. Sikakani said just now, laying a complaint of judicial misconduct against the Deputy Chief Justice with the Judicial Service Commission. So, this is a matter that Mr. Zuma is going to use once again, every trick in the book to try and avoid having to answer these questions.
And then what, Lawson? What happens if we never hear from him by the time this inquiry wraps up? Is there a possibility for an extension? Can there be an application for an extension? Or what happens with all the allegations that name him, where his name has come up with all those claims and allegations of state capture in all of this time?
Well, in relation to an extension, I think the matter was decided by the High Court in Pretoria earlier this year, where they gave the Commission a final extension until the 31st of March next year, and said the courts will not entertain another one. But it's obviously open to the Deputy Chief Justice to go back and argue on the basis of changed circumstances that he needs some more time. I'm not sure that whether he will do that or not. But regardless of that, the fact that the Commission may come to an end without having heard Mr. Zuma's version does not mean that no further action can be taken. And as I was saying earlier, it will then be up to the law enforcement agencies, the Hawks, the investigating directorate within the NPA, to continue their investigations, to look at the statements and testimony of witnesses that have implicated Mr. Zuma, pursue those lines of inquiry, and if sufficient evidence exists, to press formal criminal charges against him. So this is not the end of the matter for Mr. Zuma. He may escape having to account before the Deputy Chief Justice, but the law enforcement agencies will still have him within their sights.
And what about his chances there now taking this to the JSC to complain about Raymond Zondo being these, like we said, witness and the judge in a case that actually, in a complaint that actually involves him? What do you reckon his chances of success are there?
Well, again, I think on the basis of the reasoning of the Deputy Chief Justice in giving his ruling this morning, he's covered all of the bases and saying that he's considered all of these issues. They don't stack up. And so I would think that any complaint to the Judicial Services Commission will receive short shrift from that commission. And they will go through the processes that they have to in terms of looking at the complaint as it might be formulated and making a decision. But I don't think that Mr. Zuma has much chance of success there either.
All right, well, Lawson, stay with us. I'm going to go back to Thulasizwe Simelane. He's at the State Capture Inquiry for us. And just at the bottom of your screens there on the right-hand side, that's what's happening at the moment. So they haven't come back from that break. But let's just gauge from Thulasizwe Simelane just what's happening. Thulas, I'm not sure if you were able to catch a glimpse or if the former president is still inside. Have they left the building? Where are they? Did you see them leaving? And what was the mood? What did they seem like?
I did not see them leaving, Uveka, and that's because I'm standing outside of the actual chambers where the proceedings are taking place. But also, it's not difficult to know when former President Jacob Zuma has left because of the Presidential Protection Unit motorcade that does have blaring sirens when he's about to leave. So I don't believe they've left just yet. But I mean, it's an interesting discussion. It feels to me like, you know, those sums you would do in primary school, where they would say the answer is recurring up to infinity. The legal possibilities just keep on expanding here. As we are now talking about this avenue of the Judicial Services Commission complaint, which centers around the complaint that the Deputy Chief Justice put himself in a situation where he became a judge in his own cause. I won't do the Latin again. I've had my fill of showing off. But also you then have this review of the decision, right? The decision that he has taken. That's a court process on its own. You talk about the possibility of an extension. Here's another possibility. The report gets done with this commission finally accepting that we're not going to get a version from him despite all our efforts, and they record that in their final report. Well, legally, there could be other avenues that Mr. Zuma can explore, but politically, isn't it just a powerful tool for him to say, like he was saying with former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela after she released her report, that these people compiled a report without having heard my version. And you know, in politics, there's no rigor of trying to explore that and investigate what were the circumstances that led to that. It can be a narrative that gains momentum, that they went and had a whole commission and found me guilty of these things without even hearing from me.
Well, that's very interesting. I want to bring Lawson Naidoo back into this discussion. Thulas, Lawson, just hearing what Thulas had to say, I mean, is that something, I mean, considering just, you know, the big drama that we've had and the saga of this and the fact that there will be proof, there'll be video proof, there'll be transcripts to say that we tried to get you here, is that something that he absolutely will be able to use when this is over? If, like you said, those allegations, those claims can be investigated by the Hawks and the NPA, and then this won't be the end of the road just because he never said a word at this inquiry?
Well, I think it's interesting what Thulasizwe has just said, because going back to the Public Protector's report in 2016, we'll recall that Mr. Zuma, together with Mosebenzi Zwane and Des van Rooyen, tried to interdict the Public Protector at the time, Thuli Madonsela, from releasing that report. And Mr. Zuma argued exactly this point, that he hadn't been given an opportunity to give his version of the story. When the report was finally released, Advocate Madonsela also released an audio transcript of the meeting that she held with him, where she put the questions to him and he refused to answer them, asked for more time in order to prepare, and then simply did not do that. So, you know, this has been part of Mr. Zuma's strategy all along, is to try and avoid using legal mechanisms to try and avoid answering questions. So ultimately, he will probably use whatever mechanisms not to give testimony before Justice Zondo, but we've got to hope then that the law enforcement agencies are able to do their work and to formulate and bring charges to bear in court.
Thulas, just to bring you back in here, I mean, they've been pretty creative from the start in how they've tried to avoid this. Just take us back a little bit, other than this complaint against Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. Just remind us of the various tactics. Let's just go back and have a look, because they've been so creative. I mean, you know, we should all be taking some notes from this and on delaying tactics.
Yeah. We actually should be taking some notes, Uveka, because in their initial application, they laid out all the grounds on which they believed that the Deputy Chief Justice ought to recuse himself. And then after the arguments were heard, and while the Deputy Chief Justice was considering those arguments, they added another ground, which I don't think the DCJ has actually dealt with, unless, of course, it will be contained in the fuller judgment, which he said is coming, is that whole argument around making yourself a judge in your own cause. That argument came yesterday, Uveka, as the DCJ was preparing for delivering his decision on the recusal application. It basically says, by making the statement you made on Monday, which disputes the facts as contended by Mr. Zuma, that you have a relationship, you are actually friends, you have made yourself a witness in a way and basically put into the record evidence that must be considered in your decision on whether or not to recuse yourself. That comes back to that concept of you can't be a judge in your own cause, right? And that then becomes another further avenue for them to actually take this decision on review, but also creates this possibility for this complaint to the Judicial Services Commission. Justice Zondo says he's following the precedent that was set by the court, the Constitutional Court, in that Sarfu matter in 1999, where Arthur Chaskalson was the president of the Constitutional Court at the time, in that they read a statement onto the record, the judges in question there, and basically there was, it set precedent at the time. Mr. Zuma clearly and Mr. Skakane clearly don't agree with that, in that they're saying in that instance, in the Chaskalson situation, the facts there that were part of that statement were not in dispute. In this case, there's a dispute as to whether or not Mr. Zondo and Mr. Zuma were actually friends.
Well, one would have expected that they would come up with a better reason this morning when all of this is over. Like we said earlier, we never expected them to take it lying down, that he's not recusing himself from this inquiry. But surely this is something that even if you don't have a legal mind, would have been raised at the beginning to say you shouldn't be making this decision. Come and make your statement, make your argument as to why you should stay with this inquiry and somebody else, if that was the case, if that's been done before. But this just seems, and I'm going to say it just seems petty. It seems like the last. Do we get the feeling that they just want to get this to the end of this week, which is when the former president was supposed to be answering questions, and then wait and see what happens? Because, I mean, we're not sure who is due to be at state capture next week, if you have that information at hand to us. And then we know there would have been a break in December, and then just to let it slide all right till the end of this inquiry.
Here's the sense that I'm getting, Uveka. The sense that I'm getting is that in no circumstance that has been envisioned by Mr. Zuma and his legal team will he sit there in the witness seat and basically be almost like, and I always use the example of Mr. Nzeku, and basically face a barrage of questioning. Ms. Kwinana, who was recently trending during her testimony. There is no scenario in which they see Mr. Zuma seated there and facing that barrage of questions and, sometimes the exasperated, questioning of Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. They insist that he actually wants to have his version heard and taken into account in the work of this commission, but I doubt that they envision it being in this way. It then raises the question of how they envision it then, because if the Regulation 10.6 directives to give affidavits has also not been adhered to, then how exactly do we get his version of events? So at this point, my sense is, even if we do get Mr. Zuma staying behind, it will be pleading the Myeni, basically saying, I can't answer those questions. And when he is compelled, give an answer that doesn't really give an answer. Remember, he says he is choosing not to challenge some of what the witnesses have said about him, because he says it doesn't implicate him in any crime, right? And basically is not even worthy of a response. So he's simply exercising his rights not to challenge them. He can get on there and have these versions of Mcebisi Jonas, Fakey Mentor and others put to him and say, I don't believe this implicates me in anything, and I don't believe I have to answer to it. And let's see how that plays itself out.
Yeah. Well, Lawson, I mean, that for me is the other question is, instead of going through this whole palaver like we have been this entire week, why wouldn't he just go on and do the Dudumieni? Why wouldn't he just go on and do that and say, I appeared, I answered, I was there, and that's the end of it now. What more do you want from me? Wouldn't that have made more sense for him?
Well, it might be a scenario that still has to play out. So I think he's trying to delay that for as long as possible, or do away with it altogether. If he can avoid appearing at all as a witness and avoid having to refuse to answer questions, that would be a better outcome for Mr. Zuma, in his opinion. So that's clearly the strategy that he's taking at the moment, that the best bet is not to appear at all. But as Mr. Sikakani made clear on Monday, if at some point he is forced to come before the Commission, he will come there and refuse to answer the questions. And, in his founding affidavit in this recusal application, he says that he didn't respond to the accusations that have been made against him because they're all lies. Well, with all due respect, it's not his decision to determine the truthfulness or otherwise of the testimony before the Commission. That's a job for the Deputy Chief Justice. Mr. Zuma's responsibility is to refute those allegations that implicate him. And he's not taking that opportunity to do so. And he may well find at the end of this process that the Deputy Chief Justice makes adverse findings against him based on the testimony that he's heard and without having heard Mr. Zuma's version.
And, if, like we said, if they do take this complaint to the JSC about Raymond Zondo being witness and judge in a case that involves him, if they have no joy there, and we don't know what's been set for the inquiry, who else is set to appear, what times they've been given, when, we assume that there'll be a December break, or maybe there won't be now. We don't know. This is the oddest inquiry I think that we've actually had to endure, or recently, these recent events. Lawson, just remind us then, what other options would he have? And I know you spoke about it earlier, but just a quick reminder: if they have no luck at the JSC, if there is basically no time to have him this year, or what other options are there? What are the other sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel reasons they might come up with, or they could come up with, or tactics?
Well, I think firstly, in respect of the complaint that they may make with the JSC, I don't think that would impact on the functioning of the Commission, or indeed on Mr. Zuma's requirement to appear before that Commission. That would be a totally separate process that the JSC would deal with. What would impact on the Commission is a review application that Mr. Zuma is clearly going to bring to review Justice Zondo's decision this morning on the recusal application, to take that on review in the High Court. And to seek to overturn that. And whether he succeeds or not, this is a matter that is likely to drag out for quite some time. It's unlikely to be concluded before March of next year, when the report is due. So, in my view, that review application is the next stage of the Zuma legal strategy in terms of trying to avoid having to appear before the Commission.
All right.
But the question that arises is what happens between that review application being lodged and now, which is when the summons is still live.
Yeah, and what could they absolutely make him do? What could they compel him to do? Well, let's just take you back now to that decision by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo when he made that announcement as to whether he will stay or go.
The applicant has failed to meet the test for a reasonable apprehension of bias. Accordingly, I conclude that the application for my recusal falls to be dismissed, and it is accordingly dismissed.
All right, so that was a decision we've waited days for, and Raymond Zondo keeping us on the edge of our seats for a couple of days, Lawson. And not to be macabre about this, but, the former president isn't a young man. We know that he said he's had his fair share of health issues. What if he, this issue, or however this pans out, whether he's made to answer or whether the investigations continue without his having answered to this inquiry, what happens if he's no longer with us? And you know what I mean by that. What happens in that case with these allegations and claims still hanging in the air then? What happens if he takes ill, or he doesn't make it in the next year, or something happens health-wise? What happens then?
Well, I think that, that's really going to become part of Mr. Zuma's political legacy. That history will not judge him well on the basis on which he conducted himself when he held the highest office in the land. And the report of the Zondo Commission, the testimony of witnesses, the fact that he's facing fraud and corruption charges in the High Court relating to the arms deal, these are issues that will become part of his political legacy, and that's something that will be part of South Africa's history. And so while he may not get a day in court for his guilt to be proven or otherwise, that's how future generations of South Africans are going to judge his tenure as President of the Republic.
And do you think he actually cares, though? Is that something that would bother the former president, just judging by all of these efforts and what has happened involving him so far?
Well, I think any politician would want to, depart with a positive legacy as having to, help the country on a trajectory of growth, of development, of peace, of prosperity. That's what people go into politics for, to leave a positive legacy. And unfortunately, his is not going to be a very pretty one that will be written into the history books.
And I suppose, many people, many South Africans at the moment already look at the former president as a liar. And I think many of us questioning now whether that is something, is that his persona, just judging from also the different versions of what he said, of the different versions of the relationship between Raymond Zondo and the former president Jacob Zuma. I'll bring Thulasizwe Simelane in just now. Let's just take a listen, though, to what Zondo says that a meeting or his meetings with Zuma were about, saying they were not personal, but they were official. Zondo insisting he and Zuma are absolutely not friends. Zuma, as we know, having a different version. He says Zuma should have raised his objections before this commission got underway. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say then.
The meeting I had with the applicant after the Chief Justice had given my name was an official meeting. I was not paying him a personal visit. Indeed, I was informed by the Chief Justice that the applicant had asked that whichever judge the Chief Justice selected should come and see him. Furthermore, in paragraph 7E, I had in mind the Pretoria official residence of the president, hence the reference to the presidential office in that paragraph. In the light of the fact that the applicant does not dispute most of the facts set out in paragraph 7 of my statement, I am of the opinion that on the undisputed facts, there was not the kind of relationship between myself and the applicant such as would disqualify me from chairing this commission, nor is it a proper ground for me to recuse myself. In any event, I am of the opinion that if the applicant was of the opinion that I should not chair this commission when the Chief Justice gave him my name, he should have raised the matter with the Chief Justice.
Thulas, and this is an issue that we kind of joked about earlier this week when we came to sort of the analogy of a stalker and a stalker's victim, where the stalker believing that this relationship is something else and the victim going, but I don't know you, I may have seen you in the street, but we were never in a relationship. So, again, would most of us be sort of wrong to assume that the former president is a liar, or is he delusional, or did he really interpret those meetings as something else?
It's one of those that you have to chuckle. You can't help but chuckle a little bit about it, Uveka, because it's a situation that starts with former President Zuma saying, you and I are friends, hence you have become hostile towards me and actually are likely to be biased against me. And then you have the DCJ saying, absolutely not. I've seen you a few times. We've greeted a few times. We're collegial. I came to meet you once to discuss a matter of public importance at your home in Forest Town. But other than that, I've not met you at your official residence or in your office during your period as president. And therefore, you and I are actually not friends, let alone family. And then you have the former president coming back and saying, hang on, actually, we are friends. Forest Town, you mentioned one meeting, but actually it was our meeting place, quote unquote. It was our meeting place, suggesting we used to meet there regularly. And I think the only concession really that former President Zuma got from this morning was the DCJ saying that that meeting in Durban, after his name had been forwarded by the Chief Justice as the head of this commission, did take place. DCJ Zondo saying that he did not include it because he was alluding when he said we never met at his official residences. He was actually talking about the residence in Pretoria. And also going on to point out very swiftly that even that meeting in Durban was not friendly. It wasn't a personal visit. I was told by the Chief Justice that the President had wanted to meet whichever judge would have been selected by the Chief Justice for the purposes of heading up this particular situation. So it's one of those situations. They were either friends or they were never friends. I guess at this point it's left out there for people to decide, who do you believe?
Well, we did see some movement there inside the inquiry, Tula. So we'll continue our chat, bringing in Lawson Naidoo as well. Lawson, just considering just how long Raymond Zondo has taken to come to this decision, we expected it, to happen earlier this week. It's brought us all the way to Thursday as well, and also in this break as well. Just what should have we should have been back about half an hour ago already. But to your mind, what's running around in your mind as to what's being discussed between closed doors there? This really, there must be something very, very serious happening in those discussions.
Well, I would assume that the Deputy Chief Justice has called in both sets of counsel, Mr. Sikakani as well as Mr. Pretorius, to his chambers, and will be engaging with them on trying to find a resolution that is acceptable to all parties and that does not unduly hinder the work of the Commission. And obviously those discussions require some time, which is why we've had nearly 45 minutes of this adjournment now. And because I think the DCJ will want to come back with a ruling that allows the Commission to move forward. So that's my reasoning for the delay in this matter.
All right, well, Lawson and Tulas, I think we will just go for a little break. I'm sure the two of you need a sip of water or something stronger. It's still before 12, though, so just looking at the day we've had and the week we've had so far, we'll be back at the State Capture Inquiry when they resume, and we'll bring